Okay, y'all, in this video, we'll be talking about how to sew on a hook and bar. You'll need a piece of muslin. This is our 3x6 sample size folded in half. You've seen this before. You'll need a needle and thread and a hook and a bar. And don't forget your snips to cut some things at the end. First thing you're gonna wanna do, as usual, thread your needle. Tie your favorite knot. What's your favorite knot? Do you have a favorite knot? I would guess that many of you probably just hate them. I'm gonna do the French knot. 1, 2, 3. There's my knot. Trim off my little excess tail that I don't like. And we're gonna sew the hook and the bar. Ready, everybody? Great. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna start with the hook first. You see this hook? It's just a simple little hook. Interesting thing about this hook, this little part right here, see that little bump? That actually locks the hook in place. When it passes over the bar, well, I can't really, that little hook acts as a spring, that little bump acts as a spring that keeps the bar from sliding back out. Just a little bit of knowledge for you. So, to sew our hook in place, we're going to start with it down here, towards the end. Not right at the end, but towards the end. And we're gonna do just like we did with the snap. You're gonna go in from this side and come back out through the eye of the hook. So I want your needle to go in right next to the metal bar there and come up through the hole. See how that works? All right, another thing with sewing a hook and bar on, we're using a double thread. Always using a double thread on closures, don't forget. And unlike a snap, this hook doesn't have holes around it for us to go through. We have to do that part ourselves. You'll see what I'm talking about. So I want you to start up here on this side and go through like that, into the fabric and up through the hole. Take that same stitch again. Go in right where you just went in and come up through the hole of the hook. Draw that thread down. And you've got one little loop wrapped around, see? Now for your next stitch, I want you to move over a little and go into the fabric and up through the hole a little to the side of where you just were. You'll see how that looks in just a second. So what you want to do as you sew this hook and bar on, every time you go in, you want to move over a little more so that you're sewing around as many edges of this round loop as you can. See how that's looking? Now I'm going to go in here a little farther over from where I just stitched. When you get done sewing through this particular side of the hook, it should look like a little stars. A little star, kind of a line here and a line here and a line here and a line here. Like with snaps, you want to go through about 4 or 5 times. You can sew in the same place a few times if you want. It's just really important that over the course of sewing each of these eyes, if you will, you do some of this moving around the circle. So, let me pull this out of the way. You see how that looks? I've got that little star pattern. Great. Now, you're going to move over to the next hole. See how your hook can still move like this? We don't like that. You want to hold it exactly in the right place. That's how we want it to sit. So I would use your thumb, your finger on the back, and your thumb to hold that in place while you reorient yourself. Now, your thread, I'm going to hold on to this hook part. Your thread is currently coming out of this hole. You need to be sewing through this hole next. So what you're going to do is take your needle and go in right there, right next to this piece of metal, so you can go into the fabric and up through that new hole. See how that works, everybody? I went in right there and I'm coming up through that hole. Draw that thread down. And then you're gonna do the same thing you just did, double checking to make sure that your hook is still sitting straight. I want you to start sewing around the circle by going into the fabric and up through the hole. into the fabric and up through the hole. Now at this point, you can move your grip over here. Holding onto this part of the hook is a little hard. So now I can get my thumb and thumbnail back on that flat part. It's a little easier to hold and control. Into the fabric, up through the hole. Into the fabric, up through the hole. And again, you want to go through about 4 or 5 times, maybe 6 if you want to make it all the way around. Some people really enjoy this because they think it's pretty when they get these little stitches sewn. So once you've gone through both of the holes and made little star patterns around, the last step is to sew through the edge of the hook. Do you see how our hook isn't attached? And if you roll back and show all that hook, we've got to sew this fabric to this part of the hook. Now to do that, you're going to come up here and you're going to go into the fabric by this part of the hook. And you're going to come out the other side by the other side of the hook. See how I went in there and my needle came out there? Now you just take that and loop it under the hook itself. So what this is doing is sewing that hook in place. Do we see that? And you want to sew this a few times. This you don't have to go through quite as many. It's just a little bit of security. But there's one. And bring your thread under. Let's do a 2. Let's bring our thread under one more time for our third pass through. And now we've got all these sewn the way we like. We've got the hook sewn down the way we like. And now we're just gonna knot off right here, right where we just came out. Grab a couple of yarns and do the thing we do. Sew through that little loop to make your knot. Do it twice. And there, you've sewn the hook part of the hook and eye on. Or hook and bar, excuse me. This is clearly a bar, not an eye. So, now you need to move to the other side. And do your bar. Get some new thread if you don't have enough, or get a or tie a knot in the piece you've already got. Once you're threaded and knotted and ready to sew, I want you to grab this bar. Now you see this bar has a slight curve to it, right? It dips in. This curve needs to be up on your fabric. That way the hook can pass under it. Does that make sense? If you got it like this, your hook can't really pass under that very easily. So you want to make sure that bump is up off the fabric. Also, you want to make sure that your bar is perpendicular to the hook. Otherwise it can't hook through. So what's going to happen here is we're going to sew this bar here. And that way this hook can come and hook into it, just like that when we've got it sewn. This sews in about the same way that the hook does. Just a slightly different transition from hole to hole. So you're going to want to start by going into the fabric and up through the hole. And you want to take that same little stitch again to start with. And then you start moving around and making your little star pattern as you sew around this hole in the end of the bar. Now my threads are being a little ticky and they're not passing through at the same rate, so I'm going to do that trick where I grab one thread and then the other and try to tighten them up. This is not my finest stitching, everybody, but some days are better than others. It's been a pretty long afternoon. So now I'm just going to continue attempting to sew around this bar if my thread will behave. All right. Into the fabric, up through the hole. couple more of those into the fabric, up through the hole. And one more into the fabric and up through the hole. Now, to transition down to this other hole down here, we're going to do like we did between the snap holes, and we're going to slide between the two layers of fabric. So I want you to go into the fabric and slide on over and come out through that hole. You see how that worked? I'm pretty sure, yeah, I did good. What you don't want to do is have that thread showing on the back side. So you're sliding between the two layers when you make this transition. So I've got on my little star pattern there, and I'm ready to start stitching around these holes. Now again, make sure that your bar is sitting in the correct position and is not crooked or angled funny before you start sewing it down in place. When you're ready, you go into the fabric and up through the hole. And just go around the circle like we've done before. And maybe your threads will behave better than mine. Mine keep trying to come through the fabric at a different rate. Into the fabric, up through the hole. Into the fabric, up through the hole. Oops. Into the fabric, up through the hole. Just a few more stitches on this, and we're ready to knot off, and your hook and bar is sewn on. I'm gonna do one more. All right, now I've sewn around all the sides of the hook. Now can you imagine why we sew like this? It's so that your hook and bar doesn't rock. If we just sewed here and here, this whole thing could rock left and right, and your hook's not really reliable. Now to sew your knot, you do what we always do, and you pick up a few yarns right next to that last thread coming out. And you make yourself a little loop. Oh goodness, that turned ugly. There we go, there's my little loop, and sew through it. And one more time. And that, my friends, is how you sew a hook and bar. Now, while it might be very satisfying to hook it, you might not find it as satisfying as the snap. The snap just makes a great noise. The hook and bar is just a nice, solid piece of work. There it is. That's how you sew a hook and bar on.